The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Tonight, a look at how wildfires are getting worse. Then, why is it so hard to do anything about climate change? That's all next on The Agenda. With wildfires ravaging parts of the country, leading to thousands being evacuated from their homes and blanketing cities in smoke, is Canada's wildfire problem continuing to get worse? For more now, we are joined by Annabella Bonada. She is Managing Director of Climate Science at the University of Waterloo's Intact Centre on Climate Adaptation. Annabella, lovely to have you on the program.
Thank you for
having me.
First time,
right?
Yeah, this is my first time.
Excellent. Okay. We're going to start with some pictures here. This is, Sheldon, you want to bring these up? This is the fire known as Red Lake 12. This is in northwestern Ontario. It spans more than, if you can imagine, 175,000 hectares and has forced more than 2,000 people to evacuate from Deer Lake First Nation and Sandy Lake First Nation. And we're going to follow that up with a photo from last week when 19 workers were trapped on a construction site near Sandy Lake First Nation. To the best of our knowledge, everybody's safe and okay, but this has got to be terrifying. Canadian officials say this wildfire season is about to be the second worst on record, the worst being 2023. Why is this summer so bad?
There are many factors that are contributing to such an intense wildfire season. So the areas that we're seeing in the country that are having so much wildfire, like in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, they're undergoing drought. They've been undergoing drought for a few months. In the winter months, they didn't have enough snow, so that snowpack was low and it melted really quickly in the spring. They had a really early spring that was very, very warm. When that water melts, it doesn't really replenish the ground or the vegetation. In May, parts of Manitoba, of Saskatchewan, we're seeing 30 plus degree Celsius days, something that we didn't have in southern Ontario, for example. That hot, dry, windy weather just really helps spread the flames when a wildfire is started. Those early wildfires are usually human caused, so it can be an ATV through an area, a train that goes through an area, or a campfire that starts the wildfire. But the spread is due to all those really dry conditions and hot conditions that just cause it to grow and grow.
I have to learn more about human caused. Human caused as in accidentally, on purpose, or what?
Mostly accidentally. So like I mentioned, even a train going through a train track, there's a spark, it can start a wildfire. ATVs out in trails can start a wildfire. Mostly these are accidental, as we know, and early in the wildfire season, they are caused by humans. But as we move in through the season and we get those summer storms, lightning cause most of the wildfires that happen out in remote regions, those big ones that end up spreading. Those are caused mostly by lightning. Year to year, it's about 50% human caused, 50% lightning caused, but it can vary.
I remember when we were kids, obviously, Smokey the Bear was on the commercials saying, make sure you put out your campfires. Is that still a problem today?
It is. I'm a big camper, and unfortunately, I see people not really listening to these rules that we have, like either don't have a fire. 2023, people could go camping, but no fires, and you would still see some campers having a fire. I think there's just like they don't understand the risk that it means to have even that little bit of campfire, where some of us do understand the risk.
Okay, let's do some more numbers here. So far this summer, an estimated 220,000 hectares have burned in Ontario, 220,000. Compare that to nearly 750,000 hectares in Manitoba and more than 1 million in British Columbia. What makes those provinces so far apparently so much worse than ours?
So the conditions of those provinces. So Manitoba has had drought conditions, or as I mentioned, the spring didn't have that cool, like rainy spring that we've been having in Ontario. In Ontario, we didn't have the same snow that we've had in the past, but we had such cold temperatures that the snow stuck around for a long time. And then we've had a spring that, ask any Ontarian, has been cold, rainy, like all the weekends. It always falls on the weekend. But really, that's protecting us from those wildfires being more intense in our region this year. I would just caution, don't get used to that. Next year, drought could hit our region. Drought and precipitation, they're locally different, so you're not going to get the same thing every year. British Columbia has been undergoing drought since about 2021. So even though they had a better snowpack in some regions of the province, it's too long term. So the ground is not very good at absorbing that moisture when it is there.
Obviously, we hear the most about fires closer to home, but of course, we're not that far removed from Los Angeles. And there are stories where this is happening all around the world. So we are not alone in this, right? This is happening everywhere?
It's happening everywhere. When 2023 was the worst wildfire season for us, it was one of the worst for other parts of the world as well. So when we have our summer months, it's the same for Europe. And they were struggling just as much as we were in Portugal and Greece. Their firefighters came here and then we sent ours out there. What we saw in LA, that winter wildfire was incredible, just outstanding. That shouldn't have happened to that degree. Just things are shifting that much and that quickly that we're starting to see wildfire years instead of wildfire seasons.
Obviously, homes can burn, people can be homeless, communities can be destroyed. But go beyond that, the broader areas where there's nothing but nature. What are the long-term ramifications of having out-of-control wildfires on nature?
Unfortunately, it means displacement of wildlife. So they'll move out. They'll try as much as they can. Of course, some animals will die. The biggest issue is that these forest areas might not recover in the way that we would expect because climate change is causing such rapid changes. So where we had a certain type of forest now that's burning down, we might not have the same one going forward. So we might not have the same ecosystem. Additionally, the emissions from wildfires, they're huge. In 2023, Canadian wildfires emitted the equivalent of the aviation industry globally. So the emissions are enormous when we have wildfires, and they have implications globally. And even if we want to talk about wildfire smoke, this season already we had wildfire smoke across the country and all the way to the US. So it has a real impact on our health and just kilometers away from where they're occurring.
Do you think more people will die of, I don't know, lung-related illnesses because of all the particulate matter that has gone further away from where these fires are happening?
We have numbers from Public Health Canada that how acute wildfire smoke can affect people and how chronic wildfire smoke affects people. And it does cause more deaths each year. It's hard to track and it's hard to have the numbers. And what we've been experiencing over the last few years, I don't think we'll see the real effects until, maybe 10, 15 years from now. There are many people tracking that and doing investigations to see how it's going to affect us. But I do think we will see an uptick of deaths related or illnesses related to this inhalation of the wildfire smoke.
What do you want governments to do to adjust to this new reality?
There's so much that governments should be doing. So after 2023, there was a strong federal response saying we're going to put more funding towards training firefighters, towards the equipment that we need for firefighting, and towards FireSmart. So FireSmart is a program that helps homeowners and communities understand how to reduce risk at their level. However, this isn't going away. So we need to do both things right now. And when I say both, I do mean we need to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. If we don't do that, wildfires continue, and they will continue to grow and be as intense as they are now. But we also need to prepare our communities. So we do have those programs. We have FireSmart. But how many people are actually fire-smarting their homes or their communities? So we need a strong education program so that people understand their risk.
Where should they find that education program?
So right now, FireSmart has everything online. It's excellent. We have from the Intact Center also just a one-sheet infographic that tells you the actions that you can do around your home to reduce your risk right now. But it's alerting people to that. So we are working with different mayors across the country who are sending these out directly to their constituents. We're working with some banks across the country who are also mailing these out. Some insurance companies are mailing these out. So they're trying to get these out to their customers to really understand their risk and reduce their risk from this. And we're doing as much as we can. So even just speaking to the media, going directly and speaking to ministers, provincial and federal, and saying, hey, the education materials here, use it, take it, tell people what they can do.
I well remember a couple of years ago, the worst year on record, being in Northern Ontario and seeing the skies being orange and you couldn't be outdoors because you couldn't breathe.
Yeah.
Do you think that might finally bring it home to people that we are in a situation here?
I think it does to many, many people. So when these impacts from climate change start to really impact our life, for example, like our recreation. So the summer months are short in Canada and we like to be outside, but now you're being told you can't go outside because of the smoky air. People feel that impact and they want to see change. They want to know what they can do in the moment, but also in the long run. We're going to continue to have these intense wildfires. We're going to continue to have bad air quality. So there's something that we need to do to protect our society to continue to have the lifestyle that we enjoy in Canada.
Annabella, thank you for this. We are going to take advantage of you schlepping all the way 2 hours down the 401 to be with us today to put you to work in our next discussion as well about climate change. So stick around and we shall be right back. Thank you for this, though.
Thank you so much.
Climate change has come up again and again in our 19 seasons on the agenda. We've explored government climate policies to combat it, examined climate change denial, looked at the toll studying climate change has had on scientists and activists over the years, and so much more. But tonight we ask, if climate change is the existential threat everyone says it is, why is it so hard to do anything about it? For more, we are joined by Tim Gray. He's Executive Director of Environmental Defense. Jessica Green, professor in the Department of Political Science and the School of the Environment at the University of Toronto. Tyler Hamilton, Senior Director for Climate at Mars Discovery District and a former climate reporter for the Toronto Star. Tia Kennedy, an Indigenous rights and climate activist and member of the Government of Canada's Environment and Climate Change Youth Council. And once again, Annabella Bonada, Managing Director of Climate Science at the University of Waterloo's Intact Center on Climate Adaptation. And it's great to have all five of you around our table here tonight on TVO for a very important and timely discussion, because when we started talking about these issues, climate change related, in 2006, we were still at that point debating whether or not humans were actually responsible for climate change. Okay, you first. What effect do you think those early debates had on climate action?
Well, I think, they shifted the conversation to we need to have science involved. And they established for a time the importance of scientific information in informing the climate debate. And I think we have seen a shift away from, for the most part, climate denialism to sort of maybe more subtle forms of obstructing progress on climate policy. Now, of course, there's been a resurgence with the fake news and AI-generated stuff, alternative facts, a resurgence of dialogue around sort of climate change is not caused by human activity, which is unfortunate to say the least. But I think, and at the beginning, the input of science into the discourse really did help shift the conversation in a meaningful way towards action.
Annabella, how have you seen the debate shift over the last couple of decades?
I've seen the debate go a little bit more from the mitigation side where, again, people weren't even believing the science or that this was happening to, okay, we understand the science, there's a lot of data, there's something that we need to do about this, we need to reduce our emissions, to over the last couple of years, we've seen a big change towards, okay, we also need to adapt to climate change. So not only do we need to reduce our emissions to slow it down, but if we don't do things to build our resilience, our communities, our homes, people are going to continue to be impacted. So adaptation has entered the conversation in a more positive way, where many years ago it was seen as giving up on the climate file. Now we understand that we need to do both.
You are kind of here representing your entire generation because you're going to have to deal with all of what this generation has wrought. How do you see it?
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, I'd be lying if I said I didn't have eco-anxiety. We're inheriting a crisis that we didn't create. It's really difficult to sometimes have that hope. But I think that care and that eco-anxiety means that, we do have a sense of love for our environment, and that love is what's going to give us the power to create the change that we want to see in the world. And so that gives me a lot of hope from our generation that we're going to be able to move this work forward in a good way and have our voices heard in the meantime.
Let us look at some numbers here. This is the Angus Reid Institute, which did some number crunching. In 2009, 62% of Canadians surveyed agreed that climate change is a fact and it's caused by humans. 62%. Fast forward to the year 2021, more than 70% agreed with that statement. So it's going up. We're now in 2025, and we seem to have regressed. We're back down almost where we started in 2009, only 63% agreeing that climate change is caused by humans. Meanwhile, the number of Canadians who think climate change is caused by natural changes and cycles has gone up. It was at 14% in 2009, then 19% in 2021, and today it's at 23%. Tim, what do you make of those numbers?
Well, they're fascinating, aren't they? I think it really underscores the success of the disinformation and misinformation universe, in particular on social media. It was mentioned earlier, Jessica was saying that, science came to the fore. Remember Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth 20 years ago. That had been at the end of a very long concerted campaign by the oil and gas industry to deny that climate change was real. But they really changed gears over the last few years, and this is coincident with the election of President Trump for his first term and then re-election now, and heavy investment in disinformation by the oil and gas industry in particular to try and confuse the public and make it look like these problems around climate change are in fact just some kind of natural things that are sunspots or some other things. So it really is a concerted campaign to try and take us back 20, 25 years.
And those numbers suggest they're winning.
Absolutely, they're having an impact. I wouldn't say that they're winning because, as you see from the numbers, it's still a minority opinion that climate change isn't real or that it's not caused by anthropogenic emissions. But it's definitely a concern. But I think the backdrop to this is a very rapid energy transition that's occurring in most of the world. And there are massive technological, social, and employment benefits from going down that road. So I think that ultimately we will get there. But there's a concerted effort by the oil and gas industry to stop the transition, that's for sure.
Tyler, I want to take you down memory lane for a second. 15 years ago, when you were a ink-stained wretch, a reporter, we talked about the difficulty of getting reliable information to people. We talked about it on this program, and our director, Sheldon Osman, is going to show you what you looked like 15 years ago. Roll it if you would.
On the issue of journalists needing to be more skeptical, I think that part of the problem is reflective of the state of the media in general. We have more dilution of the reporting. We don't have specialists on the beat, science reporters, environmental reporters. Those are the only reporters that are really going to go there and interview the scientists and go through the reports and maybe say, I'm going to question this guy or this woman on this particular issue because it's a little iffy. If you're expecting general assignment reporters or political reporters to do that, that's not going to happen, right? So what you're going to end up having is the mushy middle. The lazy approach to skepticism is to stick to the mushy middle, and that's what we're seeing.
So 15 years ago, there weren't enough reporters specializing in covering climate change. How about today?
Well, first of all, a lot more gray here, so thank you for reminding me of my younger years.
How come the glasses now?
Yeah. I would say that there's a lot of great reporting going on out there, but there's such a flood of activity now. There's bloggers, there's social media, there's AI manipulated social media that a lot of the truthful messages get skewed from the misinformation that's out there, building on what Tim was saying. On the other hand, I think that there's a lot more clever and intelligent reporting on the business side and the innovation side. We're seeing a lot more writing about the capital that's flowing into innovations to help solve climate change. We're seeing a lot of business journalism talking about the importance of businesses altering their operations to be able to tackle it. So, if there's any hope, it's the sign that there is a market movement. And it's being skewed by a lot of the kind of anxiety that's out there. It's not where it needs to be, but it's heading in the right direction. We just need to speed it up.
Well, tell us, Annabella, do you think most of the information we're getting is reliable and accurate or not?
From the media, I would say they're doing a great job. I think the media has really shifted the conversation. So just a few years ago, maybe 5 years ago, it was, what's the problem? Why are we here? Why is this happening? And it's shifting more and more to, okay, but what do we do about it now? We know there's a problem. We know there are lots of solutions. So we get asked more and more how to actually help communities, how to actually help residents. What's missing in policy? What's missing in the infrastructure that we have set up in order to protect our communities? Those conversations are much more present now in the media than they ever were before.
I wonder, though, if part of the problem here is that many people do not distinguish between the guy writing a blog at the end of the street and the Washington Post. Yep. They treat them with equal gravitas. What do we do about, well, no, I won't ask what to do. That's a different show, but that's an issue, isn't it?
I mean, I think that is an issue, and I want to go back to the points that were made before, which is that I think we're finally seeing a shift in the public discourse, and I've been pushing for this for a long time, of making this not about climate change and emissions, but really about the energy transition. What does the future of Canada look like? How are we going to live our lives, you know, in 20, 30, 40, 50 years? What kind of public services do we need? What kind of transportation do we need? What kind of trade policy do we need? You know, instead of sort of having this, nobody wants to have the argument with their uncle or aunt at the Thanksgiving dinner table about whether climate change is real. Right? But you can talk about what kind of job you want, right? Or what you want for your kids, right? Or what, you know, those are the kinds of conversations which are really about climate change and what we do about climate change, but framed in a totally different way that I think a lot more Canadians can get behind.
Tia, what sources do people your age go to try to find accurate, reliable information about this issue?
I think TikTok is a big one, and social media oftentimes, and it's unfortunate now that we don't have access to news outlets through our social media channels. That creates a barrier, and so sometimes we're getting fed misinformation, but oftentimes I find actually our generation is doing the proper research that needs to be done, and we're saying the things that need to be heard, and we're really passionate about this issue because, again, it's our future that's at risk.
Okay, let's go back down memory lane again. This is from 2014 about trying to get people to pay attention to this issue. Sheldon, if you would.
Because I actually believe through the work that we do that people know that there's a serious crisis facing our climate, that they know that there's action to be taken. And I also think that there's a bit of message fatigue, right? It's very doom and gloom and dreading the future outcome. And I think people are much more motivated by a positive, optimistic message.
So you can only tell them we're going to hell in a handcart so many times before they start to tune out?
Tune out.
Ercilia Serafini, whose name sounds almost as good as yours. Yeah, there we go. That's who was in that clip for those listening on podcast and couldn't see who that was. Okay, Tim, you wonder how many times you can tell people the planet is burning up. And they look outside, and while there may be wildfires, etc., they're not buying it. You can't go to that well too often, can you?
No, you can't, and I think that is why it's so important to talk about the kind of future that we want to try and build, especially from an economic perspective. You know, if we look at a global scale, we see that, 35 years ago, China made a decision that was going to lead in the energy transition and the energy revolution, and they have invested heavily there. Electric vehicles we hear a lot about, especially coming from China nowadays, solar panels, wind farms, etc. And right now there's kind of a debate going on within North America, especially in the US, about whether or not we're going to sit this technological revolution out. And that would be the first time that the West has ever looked in the face of a massive technological change and decided we're going to stick with the old one. And that has huge consequences for future economic prosperity, future quality of life, future employment. And I think people that are rational realize that you can't put the genie back in the bottle. Electric vehicles are better than gas-powered vehicles. They go further, they pollute less, they're cheaper to own in the long term. Solar panels are the cheapest form of electricity on the planet now, and they are the most installed new form of generation that we see across the world now.
And the President of the United States actively opposes both.
He does, and that's an interesting commentary on where North America is at as dominated by the U.S. because it's very, very dangerous, aside from climate change. And climate change is real, and climate change is going to dismantle our society if we don't do something about it. And yes, that's doom and gloom, but it's also just a fact.
Well, Tyler, we heard it a moment ago where Tia sort of confessed that she is one of many in her generation who suffers from a kind of eco-anxiety. And I wonder whether people respond to that anxiety at times by simply tuning it out.
Yeah, they shut down, right? It's overwhelming. You know, we as humans, that's how we're built, is when things become overwhelming and you don't feel you have an ability to change it yourself, you just try to focus on other things. But I do think that there's a way to get through by balancing what's actually happening in terms of the climate and environment with the solutions that are out there, with a lot of the progress that we actually have made, and what the progress could be in the next 15 years if we did, X, Y, and Z.
Zed.
Zed. To Tim's point, You know, if you look back 15 years, like we were just talking about electric cars, right? Well, there was the Prius, right? But that wasn't a plug-in electric that was charging with the electricity system. Look where we're at today. It's massive. Solar, wind, it's more affordable than any other fuel source, right? We're seeing it exceed the investment of fossil fuel infrastructure today. And we shouldn't confuse it being a North American thing. I think there's regions within North America that are staying progressive. And there's other places around the world that are doing a lot of things, but we get skewed by what's in front of us. And we have, again, it comes down to the messages that we're reading and the messages that our politicians, our elected representatives are giving us.
In which case, Annabella, in spite of the president, are you encouraged?
I am. I think I'm seeing change, in different parts of the country and by different politicians. And I think we've just elected, a new prime minister. And even though it's not on the agenda right now, I think it's coming up very soon. We know he has a big climate background. We know he has a new minister that has resilience in his name. So something's coming. We've got to wait until things settle down that are priority right now. But I'm really hopeful because we have the solutions. A lot more funding is going towards climate adaptation, climate mitigation. So it's going to continue to happen. I'm hopeful.
Well, let's see what people think here. Okay, we're going to go back to, which survey is this? Okay, bottom of page 3, Sheldon, graph 1. More Angus Reid numbers here. People have been asked over the years if they think the environment is a top issue facing Canadians. And what do we see? In 2019, it was about 35% of Canadians who thought climate change was a top issue. For those listening on podcast, we've got a line graph here that sort of bounces up and down a bit like a mountain. But the most recent numbers from a few months ago say only 15% see it as a top issue. How frustrating do you find that, Jessica?
I mean, again, I think this is a framing issue, right? I mean, if you think about the coverage of tariffs over the last couple months, right? That is all that's been happening, right? With very good reason. But tariffs has a direct bearing on the diffusion of electric vehicles in Canada. We put 100% tariff on Chinese EVs, which quite frankly doesn't make any sense if we really care about the climate, right? So I am discouraged in a way, but I think it shows the opportunity to really think about this as much more than just an environment issue or just a climate issue.
It's an economic opportunity.
It's an economic opportunity issue. I would also raise the question of who's actually in this sample, because I think if you ask young people, they're going to give you a very different answer than Gen Xers or boomers or whatever. So
is that right, Tia? If we surveyed only people who were 25 and younger, would climate change be a much higher number?
Definitely, I think so. And the other issues too are housing, like affordability, but that's all included in the climate sector. We're not going to have houses to live in if there's wildfires everywhere. About 60% of evacuees this year alone have been Indigenous communities and that are being displaced from their homes, their houses again. And so what's happening there, it's just going to happen in the rest of Canada if we don't take a look at this climate emergency that's happening in front of our eyes. So we need to now more than ever take a look at this. And I think young people are seeing it. They're hearing about it. It's constantly online. And that's part of the reason why we're having that eco-anxiety, because it's constantly around us. And we're very action-oriented, us young people. And so when these solutions are there, but they're not being implemented, that's what creates that worrisome within us.
Jessica Green, this is not your first rodeo on TVO. Let's go back. Here's a clip of Jessica from years ago, if you would, Sheldon.
As those tragedies become more frequent, which all the science suggests that they will be, then there are going to be more people losing their shirts. And that is essentially the existential politics of climate change. As more people lose their shirts through a variety of either extreme weather events, floods, efforts to decarbonize, they may lose their jobs, right? This is going to activate political interest groups. People are going to start getting more and more upset, right? And they're going to lobby for protections from government and elsewhere.
While that comment was fascinating, I noticed that I'm wearing the same tie 5.5 years later. I clearly haven't updated my wardrobe.
Fashion is also a big source of greenhouse gases, so there you go.
Okay. Do you still think that growing climate disasters will eventually shock people into paying more attention?
I hope so, but the evidence doesn't suggest that's the case. I think what we know, like the iron law of climate change, is that the people who are least responsible for it are the ones who suffer the most consequences. That's certainly true globally, but it's also true domestically, as Tia's point just raised about the displacement of Indigenous peoples. So I think that it's partially, I think the climate crisis may, the increasing disasters may help activate people, but the threat of what our new economy will look like is also what's really activating people. What we haven't really reconciled with yet is what do we do with the oil and gas industry? We can't, it's true that solar and renewables and the EVs are diffusing and there's much more investment in them, but we still haven't figured out what we're going to do about that piece of the puzzle here in Canada. And until we do that, we're going to keep having these kinds of events.
Well, Tim, you've been a candidate for office before, right? So you understand the political ramifications of what I'm about to say. The Premier of Alberta, in her judgment, sees the oil and gas business as part of a broader question of national unity. And that if we want to actually keep Canada together and keep the forces of separatism in Alberta at bay, we've got to exploit those resources. That's a whole new angle on this story that we weren't thinking about 15 years ago. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, well, she's obviously, taking a very hard line on that issue, representing the oil and gas industry. I think that we have an opportunity, though, and this was mentioned by others before, is we have a new government now headed up by a prime minister who has a deep background in climate finance, climate policy, and knows how to manage.
Whose first action was to kill the carbon tax.
Exactly. We can get into the carbon tax issue, but also committed at the same time to increase the industrial carbon price stringency and price over time, which is where most of the emissions come from, and it's easier to get reductions from that sector for a bunch of reasons that are complicated. But you can get more emission reductions from an industrial carbon price than you can from a consumer-driven one. So he understands that I would be happy as a climate advocate and activist if the Prime Minister never spoke about climate change again, but spent all of his time retooling the Canadian economy in a way that reduced emissions and helped with the energy transition and created new jobs for Canadians in the world of that new energy transition. Jessica's right. We do need to replace the revenue that comes from oil and gas, in particular in the employment space for places like Alberta. And that there are possibilities there. I just think of one example is that our U.S. neighbors in Alaska and in the lower 48 have about 4,000 megawatts of electricity being generated right now from geothermal activity. We have the same rocks in Alberta. As you can imagine, the Rocky Mountains don't stop at the border. We have none happening here. The same technology, the same people that dig wells also can dig holes for geothermal. We're going to need a massive increase in the amount of electricity in North America over the coming decades because we are going to electrify everything in order to have this energy transition occur. Alberta could become a huge exporter of electricity, both from wind and solar and geothermal. And the employment, of course, comes from building the infrastructure. We could be doing that in Alberta. So instead of trying to stop the energy transition, which the Alberta government is actively doing, they've essentially shut down the renewable industry in Alberta, they could instead be embracing it and recognizing that over time, the oil and gas industry, because of the change in the demand structure for oil in particular, is going to go away. And we're going to need to replace those jobs if we want people in Alberta and Saskatchewan, other places where there's oil, to continue to work.
Tyler, I'd be interested in your take on the new Prime Minister, in as much as, on the one hand, his environmental bona fides are pretty well known. On the other hand, first action was to kill the consumer part of the carbon tax. He has also talked about the potential of exploiting those natural resources in Alberta as part of nation-building exercises. How do you rate him? How do you gauge him?
He's playing a game of politics. I think if you come out hard on the climate side and moving towards just one side of the story, you get that reaction, right? So he's trying to walk a fine line. I do think that there's a huge opportunity, building on Tim's point, of like transition pathways for the oil and gas industry. You mentioned geothermal. Geothermal can also be used at a much shallower level to help get homes off of natural gas for heating and cooling. So you could conceive of entire networks that operate the same way and use the same business model as natural gas utilities use today, but that create district thermal energy systems throughout neighborhoods, particularly dense neighborhoods that have a lot of older housing, and they're currently really dependent on natural gas. So, but I think behind the scenes, I don't think these environmental credentials are going away. I think he's going to be clever, and he's going to do things that have an impact and don't make a big splash about it the way the previous government did.
Tia, what's your view on that? As you look at the Prime Minister, do you think he's adequately prioritizing climate change in a way you'd like to see?
I think I'd like to see more Indigenous-led climate solutions. The IPCC report, talked about the importance of Indigenous rights and leadership as a climate solution. And so I think we need to take a look more at that. The bills that are coming out, like here in Ontario with Bill 5, and the lack of duty to consult with Indigenous peoples, that's a bit concerning for me. It's just going to fast-track development, erode Indigenous rights, and then the destruction it could do on the environment is really scary. And so I think there needs to be a lot more consultation with Indigenous peoples as a climate solution if we want to have more hope and achieve progress in a good way, in a holistic way across all sectors.
The premiers have all been at the table negotiating with Mark Carney on nation-building projects. Indigenous representation has not been. What do you think of that?
We see that often, even internationally. Indigenous peoples aren't formal signatories of the climate negotiations that happen. I think there is some consultation that's been happening with the national organizations between, Prime Minister Mark Carney and Assembly of First Nations and whatnot. But again, what I'm hoping to achieve during my time serving on the Youth Council is really ensuring that grassroots voices are being connected to ministers, something similar that Indigenous youth from the past council did, Sunshine. She really made sure to bring those voices together, and so that's what I'm hoping to do in the future.
Jessica, do you believe in the Prime Minister?
Yeah, I wanted to jump in on this. I think we put a lot of stock into the fact that Carney does know a lot about climate change, and he's been very deeply involved. But as we saw from the graphs, scientific knowledge does not policy change make, right? And I absolutely agree that he is playing politics, and he's talked about. He's talked a good game on climate, I think, in a lot of ways, but at the same time, he's talked about pipelines and more carbon, fossil fuel infrastructure, which we know is absolutely a terrible idea because it's going to lock in more emissions for decades. So I think it would really behoove him to think about some of the things that have been discussed here about how do we have a real transition pathway, which means creating jobs, housing, vocational training in ways that we don't just try to wring the last dollars out of the fossil fuel economy. That is a losing strategy. The tar sands are a losing strategy. They're not cost competitive.
You just called them something they hate being called.
I know. I did that on purpose because it's some of the most carbon intensive fossil fuels that are out there in the world. And, as we transition away from them, they're going to be some of the first to go. So I think, playing politics is ultimately going to be a losing strategy. What it means is we'll make a little bit of incremental progress, tread water, still put some money in the fossil fuel industry, which ultimately we have to pull the plug on. We have to do that. And I don't envy the politician who has to do that, but it's not looking like Carney's really going to swing for the fences there.
How do you rate how he's doing so far on this?
I think everyone's done a great job of explaining how he's doing right now and some of the changes, playing politics. I fully agree. I hope, so what I heard recently, I got to see him at a presentation, was, accelerate housing, and we need housing. So my hope is that he'll kind of focus on resilient housing. We need housing for 20 years from now, 50 years from now. So sure, we need more across the country. In Ontario, the same is happening. But if we don't build it in a way that people will have their homes for a long time, that they won't lose them due to flooding, wildfire, then we're just going to, make people suffer more. So I do hope that with those plans come that resilience plan as well. But it's still early in the game. I hope we hear about that soon.
We got about 5 minutes to go here, and my hunch is we should leave our viewers and listeners with some sense that we have made some progress over the 19 years that this program has been on the air. So Tyler, start us off here. What's been happening on this file that's working and we should take some joy in?
I don't think it has anything to do with what we've done from a policy perspective. I think that there is record amounts of capital. There's never been more capital out there to invest in solutions to the problem. There's never been as much business activity in this area. I think that in Canada, our issue is risk aversion. We have a culture of risk aversion. You compare about what we're doing in the U.S. and like it takes us so much longer to do things, to make decisions, to execute on programs that seem good when they're announced, but they never actually happen. But at the same time, we're selective with that risk aversion. Like we have an oil and gas sector that refuses to acknowledge the risk of stranded assets, right? So we cherry pick when something is risky, and we pick when something is not risky, when it's not aligned with what the rest of the world is doing. That's not hopeful. I know you're asking for hopeful stuff. I will end by saying that I'm seeing a lot of really cool technology from a lot of great entrepreneurs and innovators doing things that I think give me a lot of hope. And as much as it takes some time to get these things to scale and have impact, we are moving in the right direction.
Tia, what are you seeing that's giving you hope?
I mean, myself, being on the Youth Council, this is the second term that, we have one in Canada, which is phenomenal to see in the country, and so many amazing young people that are also on there doing incredible work in the environmental space. So that's one thing. And then again, always just like in my home community to see the mobilization happening across Canada of different young people that are using their voices, just being on the front lines, against this challenge. To me, that just goes to show that we are capable of the change that we want to see in the world.
Tim.
Yeah, I agree with Tyler in terms of the opportunity in technology that's evolved over the last 15 years. I think it's really important. We covered that. But policy also really, really matters. And we've bent the curve on emissions in Canada through policy. Policy drove the technological revolution that China led. Policy is leading emission reductions in Europe at a dramatic rate. And that policy moves forward when the public supports it, to Tia's point. Like when the public comes out and demands it, then you get more rapid policy change. And so public engagement is absolutely critical. And I'm seeing that. And, our current government, our new prime minister, he got elected on a ticket of representing those views. We're going to fix this problem. He talked about that. Their platform is full of policy commitments. If they do not deliver on them, they choose to pivot towards, we're just going to do the same old oil and gas thing and you'll have to get used to it. There will be a consequence because the public will not support it. And another election will come soon. It's minority government. So we'll find out what happens then.
Jessica.
I'm hopeful also about a lot of the activism that's happening, a lot of young people becoming more engaged in political processes. I think, to Tyler's point, we are living in a moment where risk aversion is not really a policy. It is such a disruptive time, and even though that's really scary and uncertain, I think it creates an opportunity for big changes, and I think that we have the potential to have a government that does that. I hope that they will, but that we have the political license now to really say, okay, well, the status quo is no longer in place. We don't have the same alliance with the U.S. That we have had for decades. And so now we really have to rethink what our role is in the global economy. And that's a real opportunity. And I think it could meet a lot of the demands of the public around affordability, social services, housing. And I'm hopeful that could be a real possibility.
Last word, Annabella.
I have two points that I'm hopeful for. One is we have the solutions in hand, both for mitigating greenhouse gas emissions, for protecting our communities in the adaptation front. We know what we need to do. Let's just start doing it. So I'm hopeful because we have everything we need. But number two, I do want to give a shout out to municipalities and local communities, mayors. They get it. They're at the forefront. They see their municipalities suffering, their constituents. They get this issue and they're fighting for it every day. They need a bit more support from other levels of government and more resources, but there are a lot of people here who are very interested in doing better on this file and protecting communities.
Thank all five of you, I'd like to, for coming from near subways, and far, long distances to be with us tonight. Jessica Green, University of Toronto. Tia Kennedy, Canada's Environment and Climate Change Youth Council. Keep on keeping on, Tia. Well done. Tia, you been on TV before?
No, first time.
First time. You were awesome. You were absolutely awesome. Well done. And on the other side of the table, Tyler Hamilton, formerly the Toronto Star, now at the Mars Discovery District. Tim Gray, Environmental Defense. Annabella Bonada, who has the nicest sounding name anywhere. University of Waterloo's Intech Center on Climate Adaptation. Well done, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I love watching people's reactions when they come to the sculpture forest for the first time, because you just know, like the first time you experience Christmas, like it's just this awe moment.
You're not born an artist, you know, art is sort of something that you can learn, it's something that you can master.
300 years from now, we're all gone and the forest has grown in. Somebody's going to find that and think, what were these people doing? You know, hopefully they'll get to the idea that it was a sculpture gallery.
People ask me what we're doing with this high heel shoe in the middle of a forest here. I said, well, I just like to say that we're more than rocks and trees and lakes here in Haliburton. We know how to step out on the town.
The Haliburton Sculpture Forest is actually the best and the biggest and most unique sculpture forest in all of Ontario. I've been a friend of the sculpture forest ever since it started back in 2001, and even when I'm not working, I come here just to walk with friends or with my dog, and it's a place that I never get tired of coming. When the sculpture forest first started, the group of people, Barb Bolin and Jim Blake being the two people that really got this going, the goal was kind of to install one sculpture per year, and they have far surpassed that.
I was talking to the Al McPherson, who was the coordinator of the ecotourism program at Fleming College, and we were talking about places in the world that have done something like this, and he told me about the Grisdale Forest, which is in the Lake District in England, and that they had sculptures in their forest. So I went to England, actually stayed in the artist residence, went out to see with the curator there, went out to see the sculptures in the forest. So we thought, okay, let's give this a try. Haliburton is known as a huge arts community now, but when I moved here, there was one artist who lived in the community, and he moved away about 6 months later. So it has been a very quick growth, and it has worked extraordinarily well. In my career, what I was Dean of the college, the Haliburton School of the Arts campus in Haliburton, and I see students every day who would come out to settle their mind, to get inspiration, and it's so wonderful to see people who are kind of stuck maybe in an art project that they're doing, coming out and walking around and coming back and having the inspiration they need to go through with whatever it is that they're working on.
This is sculpture of Gellert by Marianne Barkhouse. It was named after Bethgelert, which is a village in Wales. And the translation of Bethgelert is the grave of Gellert. And the story goes that Gellert was the faithful wolfhound of Prince Llewellyn, the last prince of Free Wales. It's a very gruesome folktale where he thinks the dog has killed his baby son and he kills the dog. And this whole cautionary tale about humans' relationship with animals. And it's also about how humans, other humans, as colonists do with First Nations people. Marianne's a First Nation artist.
My name is Angelica Ingram, and I work for the County of Haliburton as the manager of tourism. We get international guests all year round. I come here a lot with my children who love checking out the sculptures. The dome is one of their favorite ones because it's this really cool sphere with this hole in the ceiling that lets in this incredible amount of light.
When you walk towards this sculpture, which is called Atmosphere, it looks like this big sphere of rocks has just fallen from the sky. But as you make your way around to the other side, you find out there's a door that leads inside the sculpture. The person who commissioned this sculpture, her idea was a secret space. And we take the ideas from the person who wants to commission it. We send a message to artists all across the country. They put in proposals, and then we choose one. And this one won hands down as a secret space within the woods. People love to come and sit in here. This sculpture was created by John McKinnon, who's an artist from Nelson, BC.
Our creed here is to make this not like a museum, more so just like a space for the art to sit. But there's a lot of story behind each of these things that doesn't get to be told, right? So we like to do free guided tours every Tuesday at 10, starting from July and ending in August.
People with great in-depth art backgrounds come here to see the sculptures. People that have never entered a museum love coming here as well. And one of the great things that I love as a tour guide is seeing the expression on people's faces when they first come up to a sculpture or when they hear the story behind the sculpture. Just that you can just see there's a whole new world that opens up to them. And the sculptures have been chosen so that people can go up to them and be with them and climb on them and touch them and caress them. They get a true sense of what the sculpture and the art is all about. People are very, very respectful of our outdoor sculptures. We've never had any problems with any vandalism, and we have so many people that are friends of the sculpture forest. They'll phone us and they'll say, oh, we noticed that there's a branch leaning against one of the sculptures. So we have this incredible team in the community that are guardians of the forest as well.
You might go to soccer camp or you might go to hockey camp or something, but in Haliburton, when you're young, you go to art camp. So people grow up with an understanding that artists are real people, they're not magic, they don't have special powers, they learn to do the techniques that they do. Some people are born with a gift, other people learn that gift, but children need to know that artists and art is something that can be with you your whole life. I have many favorite sculptures. When I retired, there was money donated, and usually would go to a scholarship when a manager retires within the college, and I wanted a sculpture. So we have Fire and Ice, a really big shoe.
There's a few of them that are like shaped like people. It does kind of feel like, you know, what do they get to do during the day when they're sleeping here alone on this rock? Or another sculpture that we have, Embracing Eos.
The sculpture is standing and facing due east and reaching up as if to embrace the dawn. And there's a goddess, a Greek goddess of the dawn, whose name is Eos.
In the myth of Eos, the dawn goddess, she was cursed by Aphrodite so that she would fall in love with every young man she meets, which has got to be exhausting.
Now, one of the interesting things about this sculpture, because it's all this black wire, is in the evening it just disappears into the background.
So we've had a lot of people email or call or whatever and say, where did Embracing Eos go? It's disappeared. It even gets us sometimes. Even I've looked at it and thought it's disappeared. One day it was found with a Tim Hortons cup in one of its open hands. And so that sort of created the story of he disappears at night to go get some Tim Hortons coffee so that he can be awake for the dawn when Eos comes back.
The wonderful part of it is just people experiencing the sculptures themselves, making their own stories.
I think my favorite sculpture is Das Buch 23 by Marianne Rime. You don't see a whole lot of sculptures about books. In particular, Das Buch is a steel book with like chainmail pages. It's empty, but emptiness is just a beginning, right? You know, so it's like infinite possibility just from this empty book.
On the cover, Marianne has put the Japanese kanji for book and then number 23, which represents that this is the 23rd book sculpture that she has made. And then on each page of the book is a letter, so you can read through it. EMPTINESS. So the book spells emptiness, which a lot of us with a Western view see as a very sort of sad thing. It's like it's emptiness. But I was showing this to a Christian a Christian scholar who said, yes, but in the beginning there was nothing. But, wow, I hadn't thought about it in that way. And then I was talking to a Buddhist priest, and she said in Buddhism we meditate to create the empty, to give space for things to come in. And I thought, wow, I hadn't thought about it that way either. The book is empty, but it is full of meaning.
I was at the college for 36 years in the capacity as dean, and over that time we went from short workshops to week-long courses in the summer, and we would have about 3,200 registrations in the summertime. So over the years we started offering full-time programs, so young people coming into the community, and the biggest impact it's had, I think, is that lots of those people stay. Young people stay in Haliburton. They've been here for a year or two, and they decide that they like it here. It's really nice that it draws people of different ethnic groups, and especially during COVID. And during COVID, it was one of the places you could go and have a walk outside, meet with your family. So we went from perhaps 10 or 12,000 visitors a year to about 30,000 visitors a year. And now that sort of level has maintained.
Art should be available to everyone, and one of the great things about the Haliburton Sculpture Forest is that it is free for everyone. We of course appreciate donations as always, but it's just nice to be able to offer exposure to art to people of all ages.
And we see so many people come to this area to experience art, to create, to go to studios, to learn at the Haliburton School of Arts. We see so many people come for the Sculpture Forest and then discover so much more when they're here. There's so much economic impact in the arts in this community, and I think people really realize that. Not only are the artists contributing, but people who are coming to appreciate the art are contributing. I would say there's a health and well-being investment and spin-off as well.
And that is the agenda for Tuesday, June 17th, 2025. On our next program, we'll look at how the 42-year-long Tory dynasty came to an end in this province, and all that happened 40 years ago tomorrow. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org, and we'll see you again tomorrow.